The question is the motion be agreed to.
Mr. Speaker.
Grant.
Thank you,
Robertson.
Mr. Speaker. It's quite difficult on this side of the House to take a lecture on prudent economic management from the National Party in a week where they have decided that it's okay to go out and bribe the people of Northland, buy a by-election with tens of millions of dollars for the bridges of Northland. It's like some kind of tragic latter-day Simon and Garfunkel as Simon Bridges and Stephen Joyce wander around Northland with their bridges over a troubled electorate, unable to find a way of actually winning the electorate on National's record and having to go up there and drag up these 10 bridges. This week it's 10 bridges, next week it's 10 guitars, then it's 10 lords are leaping. Who knows where they'll end up? We'll have a Sky Tower in Kaitaia. We'll have some kind of Taj Mahal on the treaty grounds before we finish. This is what National's about. So lecturing this side of the House on prudent economic management when this National Party has proved time and time again it's the short-term political ends that are driving their economic agenda. And Mr. Speaker, that is never more obvious than in the debacle of the overcharging of New Zealanders for ACC. We have seen time and again in this House, National members get up, the Finance Minister Bill English get up and tell us that the ACC levies are only being put up there because his government knows best. Every official piece of advice that the National Party got from ACC, from the Treasury, from the Ministry of Business and Innovation and Employment, all said that ACC levies could come down and could come down significantly. And once again, the National Party has chosen to prop up its meagre monthly surplus off the back of New Zealanders, workers and employers paying more than they need for ACC. $350 million ripped off New Zealand workers and businesses because this government has decided that it wants to project some kind of made-up surplus. It is time for the National Party to be straight up with New Zealanders about the economy and admit that after 7 years of promising surpluses, of 7 budgets, there's still no surplus coming. And while Bill English can crow for 1 month, my prediction is when he stands up here in May, he's not going to be able to do that. He will have come with a 7th budget with no surplus in it. And that stands in stark contrast to the record of the Labor government who delivered surpluses every year. Every year that Bill English stood up in this House and said, give out tax cuts, spend that money, and no, the Labor government stuck with delivering those surpluses, and in turn, in the 7 years, the National Party have failed to deliver one. 2 election cycles, 7 budgets and no surplus coming through. And it's important to pick up one aspect of David Bennett's contribution there. Everybody, just one, everybody on this side of the House recognises the damage wrought by the Canterbury earthquakes. The damage that did for people in those regions and it did to those regions. But the reality today is that it is the rebuild from the Canterbury earthquakes that is propping the New Zealand economy up. It is time for the National Party to be straight up with New Zealanders about the fact that it is the Canterbury rebuild that allows them to have any kind of economic growth. And the National Government cannot continue to rely on the short-term politics of telling New Zealanders things are getting better when so many of them know that it's not. This budget policy statement is a tale of 3 things: of broken promises, of hopeless complacency and of dodgy meddling. We've got the broken promise around the surplus. It wasn't just that there might be a surplus, it was John Key telling New Zealanders that there will be a surplus. And why does the surplus matter? Well, it matters because that is the test that the National Government have set themselves for their economic credibility. Nobody else did it. It was the National Party who said this is the test of whether they are running the economy well, and after 7 years they have failed that test. But it's also a tale of broken promises about what's going to happen in this economy. You know, there was an instructive moment, Mr. Speaker, in the election campaign when Bill English was asked for one new idea for what could happen in the economy, and he couldn't come up with one. It's complacency. It's a belief that we can go on forever off the back of commodity prices and recovering from disaster. Well, what we've seen with commodity prices is a drop of 17%. What we've seen with exports, in the face of a promise that exports would lift from 30% of GDP to 40% of GDP, they've declined to 26%. a broken promise. And just this year we've seen the value of exports drop overall by 9%, a 30% drop in dairy. This economy needs a government that is prepared to back those who will grow those export dollars. Where is the diversification strategy in this economy? It's not there. It's a complacency that will get by. That when we walk past the port in Wellington and we see the raw logs there, that'll be okay. And the reality is that if our economy is to thrive, if we can go beyond just Aucklanders selling houses to each other, then we need an economy that benefits widely across New Zealand, where we add value in the regions, where we grow jobs in the regions. And whatever statistics Mr. English might be able to stand up in a minute and throw around, the reality of existence in places like Wanganui, in places like Gisborne, is in places like the far north of New Zealand. The reason why people are laughing at Mark Osborne when he stands up and talks about 8,000 extra jobs in Northland is the reality of life for those people in that region is far different from that. Those regions in New Zealand are struggling because this government is complacent, it's broken its promises, and it's also responsible, they don't like it, but it's also responsible for the dodgiest meddling in the economy that we have seen in many years. And my colleague David Clark will talk about this more in a few minutes. But when we look at that Sky City Convention Centre deal, it says everything about what is wrong with this government. Because the cronyism, the corporate welfare is what is driving them, the short-term political ends. What's missing, Mr. Speaker, is the long-term plan. And it is a long-term plan that on this side of the House, I am proud to say, we are developing right now. And that is about a relentless focus on work and on jobs, on decent work that pays decent wages. Because nearly half New Zealanders missed out on a pay increase last year. Nearly half New Zealanders struggled to make ends meet. When we've got an economy that says it's okay for 260,000 kids to grow up in poverty, that is not an economy to be proud of, and that is not the economy that the Labour Party wants to see us work towards. What we've seen in recent times is that an economy where inequality grows is an economy that slows down. What we've seen in recent times is studies that show us that wages have fallen 16% behind where they should be in New Zealand, behind productivity. We've got an economy where a small group of people do well and the vast majority of New Zealanders struggle in their daily lives to make ends meet, with housing prices going through the roof, with rents going through the roof. It's not good enough just to sit there complacently and look at the statistics of inflation. Look at the reality. The reality for people in South Auckland whose rents have gone up by 8 and 9% in the last year, and they haven't seen a pay rise of 8 or 9% for a very, very long time. The Labour Party is focused on the future of work, on what kind of decent jobs can be created. Mr. Speaker, there's no room for complacency when studies out of the United States are showing that 47% of jobs are at high risk from technology. There's no room for complacency when we know we have to create more sustainable jobs that stop damaging the planet and grow the economy and the environment together. There's no room for complacency when the latest unemployment statistics show a rise in unemployment years after Bill English and John Key have declared the recession to be over in New Zealand. And there's no room for complacency where small businesses are being ripped off and overcharged by this government. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we believe that the budget policy statement represents a government that has broken its promises to New Zealanders, that has been complacent about the future of the economy, and that has meddled with dodgy deals. It is time for the budget to focus on how New Zealanders will have decent work opportunities in the future, how New Zealanders will be able to ensure that future generations grow up where everybody has the same opportunities to succeed, not just the fortunate few. On this side of the House, our focus will be relentless on growing jobs and on ensuring there is opportunity for all New Zealanders and on supporting small businesses, not ripping them off to the tune of $350 million.
Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, the Labor